Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time about 3,800 years to a world built of sun-baked mud bricks and held together by a king's iron will. Imagine for a moment that you're standing on the busy, dusty streets of ancient Babylon. The air is thick with the smell of roasting grain, the murmur of 1,000 voices, and the constant clang of copper on stone. The sun beats down on your head, and the robes of passers-by kick up little clouds of dust with every step. You're a citizen of this bustling metropolis, and you probably think you have a pretty good handle on things. You know your place in the social order. You know where to buy a decent beer and how to avoid the angry look from the gods. What you might not fully grasp yet is the complex and frankly brutal web of rules that governs your every move, a code so detailed and so unforgiving that it would make a modern-day lawyer's head spin. Tonight, we're going to unravel the ancient, almost mythical legal text known as the Code of Hammurabi. It's a set of laws so harsh, so full of an eye for an eye, that you'd probably not survive a week in this world without accidentally getting yourself into some serious trouble. You might think twice before loaning your donkey to a neighbor, or even before a simple stroll across town because every action carries a consequence, and some of them are quite final. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey begins not in a courtroom, but in the chaos of a street market. You're trying to haggle for some dates, the air sticky and sweet with their scent. A merchant is yelling, his voice raw with frustration, pointing at a broken jar. You see a man, a well-dressed official, scribbling on a clay tablet, his stylus, moving with practiced speed. This isn't just a simple dispute. This is the law in action. You don't have to be a noble or a priest to be subject to the law. You feel the weight of it, the constant, invisible presence of a legal system that touches everything. It's here in this very moment that you realize how profoundly different this world is. There are no nuanced arguments about intent or circumstance. The law is black and white, written in stone and unforgiving. You've heard the stories, of course. Tales of punishments so severe they seem like folklore, and of a great stele, a massive black stone column where all these laws are inscribed. But to truly understand the code, you have to understand the man who created it. You see, the law wasn't just handed down from the gods. It was a tool, a weapon, and a legacy for a king who wanted his name to live forever. This brings us to Hammurabi himself, a figure both revered and feared. He was the sixth king of the first Babylonian dynasty, and when he came to power, the world was a messy place. His kingdom wasn't a single unified empire, but a collection of squabbling city-states. It was a time of shifting alliances, constant skirmishes, and a legal landscape that was, for the most part, a patchwork of local customs and old traditions. You can imagine the confusion. If you lived in one city-state, the rules might be one way, but a journey just a few days away could land you in a completely different legal system. It was a recipe for chaos, and Hammurabi saw it as his divine mission to bring order to the entire land. He wasn't just a lawmaker, he was a brilliant military strategist. He spent the first 3 decades of his reign methodically conquering his neighbors. You watch as his armies march out of the city gates, their bronze helmets glinting in the sunlight, their spears held high. He takes the great cities of Isin and Larsa, then Mari, and eventually even Eshnunna, until his empire stretches from the Persian Gulf to the Euphrates River. This wasn't just about winning battles. It was about laying the groundwork for a stable, unified kingdom. He knew that military might alone wouldn't hold his empire together. What was needed was something deeper, something that would bind all the different peoples and cultures he had conquered. He needed a single universal legal framework that everyone from the lowest slave to the highest priest would have to obey. And so the code was born. It wasn't a sudden flash of inspiration, but the culmination of a lifetime of work. Hammurabi didn't invent law, of course. Previous Mesopotamian rulers had created legal codes, but none were as comprehensive or as well documented as his. He gathered all the existing laws, traditions, and precedents, and with the help of his scribes, he codified them into a single massive document. This was a revolutionary act. He wasn't just telling people what to do, he was publicly displaying the laws for everyone to see. This, in theory, meant that everyone would know their rights and obligations. In reality, literacy was incredibly rare, so most people still relied on the priests and scribes to interpret the laws for them. It's a funny thought, isn't it? The laws are out there for everyone to see, but only a handful of people can actually read them. It's like having a library full of books, but no one knows how to read. You'd be completely at the mercy of the person who could. The code itself is a towering achievement. It's written in cuneiform script on a single 7.5 foot tall black basalt stele. It's an imposing sight, standing like a silent, powerful monument to justice. At the top of the stele, you can see a carving of Hammurabi receiving the laws from the sun, god Shamash, the god of justice. This isn't just for show, it's a powerful statement. Hammurabi isn't just a king making rules. He's an agent of the divine immortal given the sacred task of bringing order to the world. It gives the laws an almost supernatural weight. You can't just break the law, you're defying the will of the gods themselves. You run your hand along the smooth, cool stone, feeling the carved script. It's a mix of a prologue, the laws themselves, and an epilogue. The prologue is a beautiful, if a little boastful account of Hammurabi's accomplishments and his divine mission. He calls himself the King of Justice, and the one who made justice and righteousness shine. The epilogue is a warning to any future ruler who might dare to alter his laws, promising divine curses and ruin. It's clear that Hammurabi saw this code as his ultimate legacy, something that would outlast his empire and his very life. And he was right. For centuries, this stele stood as a symbol of justice and order, and even after his empire fell, the laws themselves continue to influence legal thought. One of the most remarkable things about the code is its sheer breadth. It covers almost every aspect of ancient Babylonian life. It's not just about murder and theft, though it certainly deals with those. It's about everything from agriculture and commerce to family law and medical malpractice. It's a complete snapshot of a society frozen in time. You can learn about how a farmer should manage his fields, what a shepherd should do if his flock is attacked by a wolf, or the proper way for a woman to be divorced. You'll find out what a builder's penalty is if a house he built collapses, or what a doctor must pay if his patient dies. It's an almost overwhelming amount of information, all laid out with a stark, brutal logic. And this is where we begin to see the true nature of the code. It's a system based on principles that are very different from our own. It's not about rehabilitation or forgiveness. It's about maintaining social order through strict, often disproportionate punishment. It operates on a principle of an eye for an eye, but we'll see that this famous phrase isn't applied equally to everyone. The code has a very clear hierarchy, and your place on that social ladder determines everything. There are three main classes: the Awilim, or freemen, the Mushkinim, or commoners, and the Wardom, or slaves. The punishments and rewards are often different for each class. A commoner might receive a harsh penalty for a crime, while a free man might get off with a fine. And a slave. Well, a slave is considered property, and the laws governing them are more about protecting the property of their owner than the slave's life. As you walk through the marketplace, the whispers of these laws seem to follow you. You see a man arguing with a builder, and you wonder, what does the code say about this? You see a woman wearing a veil, and you recall that the code has very specific rules about who can wear a veil and who can't. Every interaction, every business deal, every family dispute, it's all governed by this one document. And the punishments. Oh, the punishments are what truly stand out. They are not subtle. They are direct, often violent, and always intended to be a public deterrent. The code describes punishments like death by burning, drowning, or impalement. There are laws about cutting off a person's hand or plucking out their eye. It's a world where justice is swift and mercy is a foreign concept. This brings us to a fascinating point of historical debate. Historians still debate whether the Code of Hammurabi was actually a set of laws to be used in everyday court proceedings, or more of a set of legal precedents and principles. Was it a textbook for judges, a guide to what was considered a just punishment, rather than a literal book of laws that was read out and applied in every case? There are some signs that not all of its laws were always strictly followed, and many scholars believe that it was a sort of legal ideal, a grand vision of what a just society should look like. Regardless of its daily application, its very existence changed the game. It introduced the idea of a universal written law that transcended local customs. It was a massive leap forward for the concept of justice. So, as the sun begins to set and the shadows grow long, you stand before the great stele, its dark surface a testament to a world of strict rules and harsh justice. You see the laws about property, about marriage, about business. You see how a farmer's life is governed by a detailed set of regulations about irrigation and crop failure. You see how a woman's honor is fiercely protected, but also how her rights are limited. And you realize that for all its brutality, the code brought something new and important to the world. The idea that the law should be public, that it should be uniform, and that everyone in some way was subject to it. It was the first step on a long road toward a world where justice was not just a matter of a king's whim, but a matter of universal principle, no matter how brutal that principle may have been. You've just scratched the surface, and as the stars begin to appear over the dusty roofs of Babylon, you can't help but wonder what other brutal, surprising laws are waiting to be uncovered in this incredible legal document. The night is young, and the code is long. You're still standing there, a silent observer in a city that sleeps fitfully, the distant howl of a jackal, and the soft murmur of the Euphrates River the only sounds. The weight of the stele of the thousands of laws carved into its stone feels heavy in the night air. The first part of your journey, the introduction to Hammurabi and his grand vision, has given you a glimpse of the scaffolding, the bones of this legal system. Now, as the moon rises, it's time to delve into the very heart of the code, to the principle that everyone has heard of, but few truly understand. We're talking, of course, about the concept of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, or as the ancient legal scholars called it, lex talionis. It's a phrase so iconic it echoes through history, and in ancient Babylon it was more than just a saying. It was the brutal reality of justice. Imagine a scene playing out in a crowded square, a scene you might have witnessed firsthand. A man, a commoner, has just had his arm broken in a fight. The other man, also a commoner, stands there defiant. You hear the murmurs of the crowd, the anticipation building. The law is clear: if a man has destroyed the eye of a free man, his own eye shall be destroyed. If he has broken the bone of a free man, his own bone shall be broken. You watch as the appointed official, a stern-faced judge, orders the punishment. The man who broke the arm is held down, and with a swift, sickening snap, his arm is broken in return. The crowd gasps not in shock, but in acknowledgement. This is justice. This is the balance being restored. It's a concept that is both horrifying and, in its own way, surprisingly simple. It's a form of poetic justice, a direct and brutal mirroring of the crime. But here's the thing about lex talionis in Hammurabi's world. It was not a blanket rule for everyone. It was a principle that was applied strictly among equals. A free man who damaged another free man's body would have his own body damaged in a similar way. An eye for an eye, yes, but only if both men were of the same social standing. This is where the code reveals its true colors. The moment you cross social boundaries, the law changes dramatically. For example, if a free man were to knock out the tooth of a commoner mushkanum, he wouldn't lose his own tooth. No, the law states, if he has knocked out the tooth of a commoner, he shall pay 1/3 of a mina of silver. You see the clear difference? The punishment is not physical harm, but a financial penalty. The commoner's tooth is a monetary value, not a piece of his body that can be equated to the free man's. The value of a person's body, their very physical existence, was directly tied to their social class. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That your worth, your very flesh and bone, was determined not by who you were, but by what you were. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, the slave. What if a man were to break the bone of a slave? The law is once again brutally simple. If a man has broken the bone of a slave, he shall pay half his value. The slave is not seen as a person in the eyes of the law in this context. They are property. The crime is not a physical assault on a person, but an act of property damage. The punishment is not physical harm to the perpetrator, but a fine to the slave's owner. The slave himself has no say in the matter, no standing in the court. The law is not protecting him, it is protecting his master's investment. It's a truly chilling example of how the code viewed human life through the lens of economic and social value. This is a crucial point to remember as we move forward. The law is a reflection of the society that created it, and Babylonian society was one of strict hierarchy where your status was everything. But the code wasn't just about physical injury, it also dealt with crimes of property, and here the punishments could be equally severe. Stealing, for instance, was not just a simple matter of returning the stolen goods. The penalties were often disproportionately harsh. Historians still debate the true economic effects of these brutal penalties on Babylonian society. Did the threat of such a harsh punishment actually deter crime, or did it simply lead to a black market where people were too afraid to report crimes? For example, if a man were to steal a miner's ox, he would have to pay the boy's family 10 times the value of the ox. But if the thief could not pay, he would be put to death. It's a stark final consequence for a crime that might seem minor to us today. A particularly fascinating aspect of the code's justice system, and a little-known detail, is the concept of collective punishment in certain situations. While the code generally focused on individual responsibility, there were instances where an entire community could be held responsible for a crime. For instance, if a man was robbed in the open country, and the robbers were not caught, the local community, the town, or the district had to reimburse the victim for his losses. This was a way of encouraging communal responsibility for law and order. It was a way of saying, if you don't help us catch the thief, you're all going to pay for it. It was a powerful incentive for people to report crimes and to cooperate with the authorities. This is a far cry from our modern legal systems where individual guilt is the cornerstone of justice. In ancient Babylon, if you lived in a certain place, you were in a sense a guarantor of its public safety. It was a system that, for all its brutality, was designed to create a sense of order in a world that was constantly on the brink of chaos. And then there's the crime of false accusation, which the code treated with a unique and chilling sense of irony. If a man were to accuse another man of a crime, and the accuser couldn't prove it, the accuser would be subjected to the very same punishment that the accused would have received. It was a way of protecting people from frivolous or malicious claims. You can imagine the scene. A man accuses his neighbor of stealing a pig. The pig is nowhere to be found. The judge turns to the accuser and says, "Where is your proof?" If he can't produce it, the judge declares him a liar, and now the accuser must face the death penalty for his false claim. It's a system that encouraged people to be absolutely certain of their accusations before they ever opened their mouths. It was a form of self-regulation, a way to ensure that the legal system wasn't bogged down by baseless claims. You see how the code's justice system operates. It's not about what we would call due process. There are no long, drawn-out trials, no appeals courts. Justice is swift and often final. The goal is to restore balance, to provide a clear and direct consequence for every action. It's a system that makes a powerful statement. The law is known, the law is public, and the law will be applied without hesitation. And the punishments, while often terrifying, are designed to make a public statement. They are a display of power, a deterrent, a constant reminder that in Hammurabi's Babylon, the king's law was absolute. You might think, well, what about mitigating circumstances? What about an accident? The code is for the most part silent on such matters. It is a system that holds people to a very high standard of accountability, a system where the smallest mistake could lead to the most severe of consequences. This concept of strict liability, where you are responsible for an outcome regardless of your intent, is a recurring theme in the code. If a man's ox, a known goring ox, gored another man to death, the owner of the ox would not be put to death. He would, however, have to pay a substantial fine. But if he had been warned that his ox was dangerous and did nothing about it, the code says he would be put to death. It's a nuance that shows a slight recognition of intent, but for the most part, the code is concerned with results, not with the thought process behind them. It's a world where actions speak louder than words and often much louder than intentions. A world where you are not judged by the goodness in your heart, but by the outcome of your actions. As the moon climbs higher in the sky, you feel a gentle breeze, a soft murmur of air moving through the narrow streets. You think about how you've just seen a glimpse of what it was like to live under such a system, a system that was both a marvel of ancient legal thought and a terrifying collection of rules. It was a system that valued social order above all else, a system that made no apologies for its brutality. It's a sharp reminder that our modern concepts of justice, of rehabilitation, of innocent until proven guilty, are a relatively recent invention. Hammurabi's world was different. It was a world where a broken bone could lead to a broken bone, where a false word could lead to a swift death. And as you prepare to move on, you realize that this is just the beginning. The code has so much more to reveal about the people, the families, and the society that lived under its shadow. The night is still young, and the story of Hammurabi's code has only just begun to unfold. The last echoes of your thoughts about Lex Talionis fade into the night. The city is quieter now, but its lifeblood, its constant struggle and daily routines, pulses just beneath the surface. You've seen how the code deals with violence and retribution, but what about the things that made this city live and breathe? What about the food, the land, and the very gods the Babylonians worshipped? As the moon continues its slow arc across the inky sky, we'll move on to the laws that govern the most essential parts of Babylonian life, property, agriculture, and the divine. You'll see how a broken irrigation ditch could be just as much a matter of life and death as a broken bone. Life in ancient Babylon was tethered to the land. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers were not just waterways. They were the source of all life. Agriculture was the backbone of the economy, and control of water was everything. This is where Hammurabi's code reveals a remarkable level of detail. It contains an entire section dedicated to farming, irrigation, and the responsibilities of landowners. You can almost feel the dry, cracked earth beneath your feet and hear the gentle murmur of a nearby irrigation canal. But in this world, that canal could also be a source of ruin. Imagine you are a farmer, your fields lush with barley. Your neighbor, however, has neglected his irrigation ditch. The law is clear. If a man has been careless and has not kept his ditch in order, and has not closed his side of the watercourse, and the water has been let into the field of his neighbor, he shall pay him grain for the damage he has caused. It seems simple enough, a basic matter of paying for damages. But the code goes further. What if your neighbor's negligence caused a catastrophic flood that destroyed not just your field, but the field of everyone around you? The law states that the negligent man must pay for all the grain he has destroyed, and if he cannot pay, he will be sold into slavery to cover the debt. A single act of carelessness could cost a man his freedom. This is a crucial point. The code saw negligence not as a simple mistake, but as a crime against the community. Your laziness wasn't just your problem, it was everyone's problem. This shows how intertwined individual actions were with communal well-being. The code also had strict rules about renting land. A man who rented a field had a specific set of obligations. He was responsible for planting, maintaining the ditches, and harvesting the crop. If he failed to do so, he was responsible for paying the landowner as if he had harvested a full crop. This was a system that valued productivity above all else. It didn't matter if you were sick or if the weather was bad. If you rented the land, you were expected to produce. It was a no-excuses society. And what about property other than land? What if a shepherd, took a flock of sheep out to pasture and they were attacked by a wolf? The code takes a surprisingly nuanced approach here. The law states if a man has hired a shepherd for a year and has agreed with him to pay him a certain wage, and he has given him sheep to pasture, and the sheep have been eaten by wild beasts, the shepherd shall swear an oath before the gods and shall clear himself. In this case, the shepherd would not be held responsible. The loss was an act of a divine, unpreventable force. It's a moment of surprising grace in a code that is otherwise so unforgiving. However, if the shepherd was negligent, if he let the sheep graze too close to the river and they drowned, he would be responsible for the loss. It's a fine line between a tragic act of nature and a criminal act of carelessness. And the only way to prove you weren't to blame was to swear an oath to the gods. This brings us to the fascinating role of the gods in Babylonian justice. Remember that carving at the top of the stele of Hammurabi, receiving the laws from the sun god Shamash. This wasn't just a symbol, it was the foundation of the entire legal system. The gods were not just figures to be worshipped, they were active participants in the legal process. They were the ultimate judges. You would swear an oath to the gods to prove your innocence or your truthfulness, and to go against that oath was to risk divine punishment, a fate far more terrifying than anything a mortal judge could hand down. The belief in divine justice was a powerful tool for enforcing the law in a world without police forces or forensic science. One of the most famous examples of this is the river ordeal, but that's a story for a later chapter. For now, let's focus on the smaller, more mundane ways the gods were involved. If two people had a dispute and couldn't resolve it, they would often go to the temple to swear an oath. The temple was a sacred space, and it was believed that the gods themselves would be watching. To lie in the temple was to invite their wrath. This added an extra layer of solemnity and fear to the legal proceedings. It meant that even when no one else was watching, the gods were, and they held the ultimate power of judgment. It's a little-known detail that this reliance on divine oaths was also a way for the code to streamline disputes. The threat of a god's punishment was often enough to make a liar confess. Now, let's talk about the laws governing property damage and theft. If a man broke into a house, what was the punishment? The code states if a man has broken into a house, they shall kill him in the front of the breach, and shall hang him there. The punishment is immediate, public, and final. There are no trials, no appeals. It's a direct response to a crime that was seen as a grave violation of a family's sanctuary. This is a perfect example of a law designed to create a strong deterrent. The punishment for theft was so severe that you would have to be incredibly desperate or incredibly foolish to attempt it. This reliance on harsh public punishments leads to a question that historians still debate: to what extent was the code a reflection of existing customs versus a radical set of reforms Hammurabi imposed on his kingdom? Were these laws already in practice, or was Hammurabi introducing a new, more centralized system of justice? Many scholars believe it was a bit of both. Hammurabi took the most common laws and traditions from the various city-states he conquered and created a unified, simplified version. He wasn't inventing a legal system from scratch. He was codifying and centralizing the ones that already existed. This would have made his code more palatable to the diverse peoples of his empire. It would have felt familiar even if it was a little more strict and a little more brutal than what they were used to. As you step away from the temple and the farmlands, you realize how comprehensive the code really is. It's not just a collection of laws, it's a manual for living in a society where every action has a consequence and where the gods are always watching. It's a world where a misplaced word could be as dangerous as a misplaced tool. You've seen how the code governed the land and the gods, but what about the people who lived on that land? What about the families, the merchants, and the soldiers? The code has a lot to say about them, and the rules are just as brutal and unforgiving as the ones we've already seen. The night is drawing on, but the story of Hammurabi's code has just found its footing, and it's taking us to some truly surprising places. The air in Babylon is growing cool, and the city lights flickering oil lamps and torches cast long dancing shadows on the mud brick walls. You've seen how the Code of Hammurabi governs the grand scale of life, the land, the law, and the gods. But what about the heart of any society, the family? The relationships between men and women, parents and children, are the most intimate and personal, yet in Hammurabi's world, they were governed by rules just as strict and unforgiving as those for a farmer's crop or a shepherd's flock. As we move deeper into the night, we'll explore how the code dealt with marriage, divorce, and the social classes that defined every aspect of a person's existence. Marriage in ancient Babylon was less about romantic love and more about business. It was a formal contract, a transaction between two families. You can imagine a scene: a young man, a free man, approaches the father of a young woman he wishes to marry. They don't just talk about feelings. They talk about dowries, marriage gifts, and legal obligations. The code has very specific rules for this, and it's clear that a woman was considered a valuable asset, a commodity to be protected and exchanged. For instance, the code states that if a man divorced his first wife, he had to return her dowry to her. This was a form of protection for the woman, a way to ensure she wasn't left destitute. However, the code also had harsh penalties for women who were disobedient or had children with another man, even if the husband was away on business. In these cases, the woman could be drowned, and the man was free to go on with his life. It was a world of starkly different standards for men and women. The concept of social class was woven into the very fabric of family life. Remember the three main classes: the Oilam free men, the Mushkinum commoners, and the Wardum slaves. Your class determined who you could marry and the legal standing of your children. A free man could have children with a slave woman, but the children would likely be considered slaves themselves, or their status would be in a confusing legal limbo. A little-known detail from the code is that a slave could marry a free woman, but the law required that their children remain free. It's a surprising exception that shows that the code, while brutal, wasn't completely inflexible. One of the most chilling aspects of the code is its treatment of adultery. For a woman, the punishment for adultery was death by drowning. The law states if a man's wife has been caught lying with another man, they shall bind them and throw them into the water. It's a quick final punishment often carried out at the city gate for all to see. The husband, however, had the power to save his wife's life. He could choose to pardon her, and if he did, the other man would also be pardoned. This shows a deep-seated belief in the authority of the husband over his family. The law was there, but the husband had the final say, a testament to his power within the household. It also, of course, highlights the double standard. There was no law in the code that punished a man for adultery with a married woman. It was a crime committed by the woman, not by the man she was with. Now let's talk about the children. They were seen as the future of the family and were fiercely protected by the law. If a man struck his father, his hands would be cut off. It's an incredibly severe punishment for what might seem like a simple act of insubordination. But in Hammurabi's world, a parent's authority was paramount. It was a reflection of the social order. Just as the king's authority was absolute, so was a father's. To harm a parent was to strike at the very foundation of society. But what if a child wasn't a biological child? What about adoption? The code has extensive rules about adoption, and it's surprisingly progressive in its approach. An adopted child, once formally adopted, was a full member of the family. The law states if a man has taken a child to rear and has reared him, that man shall not be sued for the child. In other words, once the adoption was final, the biological parents had no legal claim. This was a way of ensuring stability for the child. However, if an adopted child later tried to go back to their birth family, they could have their tongue cut out. It's a harsh penalty designed to prevent a child from breaking the family bond. Again, the code's priority was to maintain a stable, orderly family structure at all costs. This focus on order extended to the professional world. In Hammurabi's Babylon, professions were often passed down from father to son. The code had specific rules for different trades, from doctors and barbers to merchants and builders. We'll delve into the doctors later, but let's consider the builders for a moment. This is where we find one of the most famous laws in the code. The law states if a builder has built a house for a man and has not made his work strong, and the house he has built has fallen down and so has caused the death of the owner of the house, that builder shall be put to death. It's a jaw-dropping rule, isn't it? A man's mistake could cost him his life. The code holds the builder to an incredibly high standard of accountability. The law wasn't concerned with whether the builder meant for the house to fall down. It was concerned with the outcome. If the house fell, the builder was at fault, and the punishment was severe. This is a key difference from our modern legal system. There's no concept of accidental death or gross negligence. The cause and effect are direct. If the house fell and the owner died, the builder died. What if the house fell and killed the owner's son? Then the builder's son would be put to death. The punishment was a direct mirroring of the crime, a brutal and simple form of justice. This reliance on harsh, direct punishment leads us to a point that historians still debate: to what extent did Hammurabi's code actually provide justice for the weak and poor? While the prologue states that Hammurabi wanted to bring justice to the land to destroy the evil and the wicked, the reality of a three-tiered legal system meant that justice was anything but equal. A free man who struck a commoner would pay a fine, but a commoner who struck a free man would be severely punished, often with a physical penalty. The wealthy had the means to pay fines, while the poor could be sold into slavery to pay off a debt. The code, for all its revolutionary principles, was a reflection of a deeply unequal society, and it codified that inequality into the law. You can feel the weight of this inequality as you walk through the city. You see the free men with their expensive clothing and a confident stride, and you see the commoners, their heads bowed, their lives governed by rules that seem to favor the rich. And you see the slaves, the property that has no rights at all. The family unit, the very foundation of life, was not a place of equality, but a microcosm of the larger social hierarchy with each person's rights and responsibilities clearly defined by their class. The night is still young, and we've just scratched the surface of how this system worked. But the picture is becoming clearer. Hammurabi's code was an attempt to create order, but it was an order built on a foundation of brutal inequality. The city is settling into a quiet rhythm, and the sounds of the day have been replaced by the rustle of the wind and the distant barking of dogs. We've seen how Hammurabi's code governed the land and the family, but now let's turn our attention to the people who made the Babylonian economy run the merchants and the soldiers. These were two very different groups, but both were essential to the empire's power and prosperity, and the code had very specific and often brutal rules for both. The laws governing these professions reveal a society that was both entrepreneurial and disciplined, a society that valued commerce and military strength above all else. Imagine you are a merchant, your hands stained with the dust of distant lands. You've just returned from a long journey, your donkeys laden with tin from the mountains. This is a business built on trust on contracts and on the promise of fair dealing. The code had extensive laws to protect this world of commerce. For instance, if a man bought a slave or an ox from a third party, and that sale was later contested, the seller was held accountable. The law states, if a man has bought or has received an article on deposit without witnesses or a contract, he shall be considered a thief and shall be put to death. It's a clear message. Every transaction, no matter how small, had to be official, documented, and witnessed. The absence of a witness was not just a mistake, it was a capital crime. It was a world where a handshake meant nothing but a scribbled contract on a clay tablet meant everything. The code also had specific rules for business partnerships. If a man entered into a partnership and his partner stole from the venture, the punishment was swift and severe. The law was designed to prevent fraud and to ensure that people could trust one another in business. A particularly fascinating law from the code concerns a man who lends money to another. If a man lent grain to a neighbor and the neighbor's crop failed due to a storm, the neighbor was not responsible for the loan that year. The law states that the lender would have to forgive the debt for that year. It's a surprising moment of grace in an otherwise harsh legal text, a small recognition that sometimes events are outside of a person's control. However, if the man simply refused to pay back the loan, he could be sold into slavery to cover the debt. It was a system that could be forgiving in the face of natural disaster, but completely unforgiving in the face of what it saw as willful deceit. Now let's turn our attention to the military. The army was the backbone of Hammurabi's empire, and the code had no tolerance for soldiers who shirked their duties. It was a world of absolute discipline, a world where the life of a soldier was not his own. One of the most famous and brutal laws concerns a soldier who deserts his post. The code states, if a man has been called up for military service and has hired a substitute, and the substitute has gone on the campaign and has been killed on the campaign, the man shall be put to death. In other words, if you hired a man to fight in your place and that man died in battle, you would be killed for it. The law was designed to prevent men from avoiding their military duties and to ensure that every soldier took his responsibilities seriously. The punishment for abandoning a post was often death. This brings up a point of debate that historians still debate: to what extent did Hammurabi's code influence the military and administrative structure of his empire? Did the laws act as a tool for military control, or were they a reflection of a military culture that already existed? Many scholars believe it was a bit of both. The code codified existing military traditions and made them an official part of the legal system, but it also elevated the role of the military to an unprecedented level. The laws governing military service were a way of ensuring that the king had a constant and reliable supply of soldiers to protect his vast empire. The military was not just a profession, it was a sacred duty, and the code made sure everyone knew it. A particularly interesting detail and a little-known fact is the code's treatment of a soldier's property. If a soldier was captured in battle, his land and his property were to be managed by a caretaker. If he was gone for more than 3 years, his property would be given to another man for military service. However, if the captured soldier returned his land, and his property would be returned to him. It's a surprisingly progressive law, a way of protecting a soldier's assets while he was away fighting for his king. It shows a small moment of humanity in a code that is otherwise so unforgiving. As the moon begins to descend and the air grows colder, you realize that Hammurabi's code was a reflection of a society that was both fiercely independent and deeply disciplined. It was a world where a man's word was his bond, but only if it was written down. It was a world where a soldier's life was not his own, and where a single act of cowardice could cost a man his life. The code was a tool for control, a tool for order, and a tool for creating a society that was both stable and prosperous. We've seen how it governed the merchants and the military, but what about the doctors and the lawyers? The code has a lot to say about them too, and the rules are just as surprising and just as brutal. The stars are beginning to fade and a faint gray light is appearing on the horizon. The city of Babylon is still asleep, but you can feel it stirring a low hum of anticipation as the new day approaches. We've talked about the farmers, the merchants, and the soldiers, but now it's time to talk about one of the most dangerous and frankly terrifying professions in ancient Babylon, being a doctor. In a world without modern medicine or sterile tools, being a doctor was a high-stakes gamble, and Hammurabi's code made sure that a single mistake could cost you more than just your reputation. This is where we find one of the most direct and brutal examples of lex talionis applied to a professional setting. You're a physician in ancient Babylon and you're looking down at a patient on a woven mat. The air is thick with the scent of herbs and incense. You have a bronze scalpel in your hand, a tool that is both a symbol of healing and a potential weapon. The patient has a severe eye injury and you've been called upon to operate. You know the law, of course. It's a constant, terrifying presence in the back of your mind. The code states, if a physician has treated a free man for a severe wound with a bronze lancet, and has cured him, or has opened an abscess with a bronze lancet, and has cured the man's eye, he shall receive 10 shekels of silver. It sounds great, doesn't it? A generous payment for a job well done. But the next line is the one that every doctor in Babylon feared. If a physician has treated a free man for a severe wound with a bronze lancet, and has caused the man to die, or has opened an abscess with a bronze lancet, and has caused the man's eye to be destroyed, they shall cut off his hand. This is not a joke. This is not hyperbole. Your hands, the very tools of your trade, would be cut off for a single mistake. There is no mention of malpractice of intent or of unforeseen complications. The outcome is all that matters. If the patient died or was blinded, you lost your hands. It's a chilling example of the code's reliance on brutal accountability. You can only imagine what it was like to be a doctor in that world. You would have to be incredibly skilled, incredibly brave, or incredibly desperate. Every time you picked up that scalpel, you were not just performing a medical procedure, you were gambling with your own future. And remember the social hierarchy. The law wasn't the same for every patient. The code states, if a physician has treated a slave for a severe wound with a bronze lancet, and has caused him to die, he shall render slave for slave. A slave, remember, was property. The crime was not murder, but property damage. The punishment was not the loss of your hands, but the replacement of the damaged property. It's a brutal reminder of how the code viewed human life. A free man's life was worth a doctor's hands. A slave's life was worth a slave. The code also had specific rules for other types of practitioners. For instance, if a veterinarian treated a cow or a donkey for a severe wound, and the animal died, the vet would have to pay a quarter of the animal's value in silver. The laws for animals were less severe than for people, but they were still there. This is a fascinating and little-known detail from the code. It had a sense of professional liability that extended to the treatment of animals. It shows how the code was not just about people, but about the entire economic ecosystem of Babylon. This brings us to a point that historians still debate: to what extent did Hammurabi's code actually hinder the development of medicine in ancient Babylon? Did the threat of such brutal punishments prevent doctors from trying new, potentially risky procedures? Did it lead to a world where doctors were too afraid to take on difficult cases? It's a valid question. It's easy to imagine a doctor looking at a complicated case and thinking, I'm not going to touch that. The risk is too high. On the other hand, the high-stakes environment might have encouraged a level of skill and precision that would be unimaginable in our modern world. It's a tricky question, and there's no easy answer. But one thing is clear: being a doctor in Hammurabi's Babylon was not for the faint of heart. The code also had specific laws for other professions, from barbers to wet nurses. It was a world where every job, no matter how small, was governed by a set of rules. A wet nurse who switched a baby in her care would have her breasts cut off. A barber who removed a slave's mark of ownership without the owner's consent would have his hands cut off. The laws were direct, simple, and brutal. There was no room for error, no room for excuses. As the sun begins to rise, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, you can almost hear the soft hum of the city waking up. The merchants are getting ready for the day, the soldiers are preparing for their duties, and the doctors are getting ready to face their high-stakes gamble. The Code of Hammurabi, in all its brutal glory, was a constant presence in their lives. It was not just a document, it was a way of life. It governed everything from the grandest legal dispute to the smallest professional mistake. It was a testament to the idea that a society, to be stable and prosperous, had to have a clear set of rules and a system of punishments that would make anyone think twice before breaking them. But there was one last truly bizarre legal process that we need to talk about, a process that had nothing to do with doctors or builders and everything to do with the gods themselves. The morning sun, now fully risen, paints the mud brick walls of Babylon in a golden light. The city is awake and bustling, but as you walk through the streets, you feel a sense of unease, a quiet whisper that there is a different kind of justice in this world, one that doesn't rely on a king's law or a scribe's tablet. We're going to talk about the most unusual and terrifying legal practice in the Code of Hammurabi, the river ordeal. This was a form of justice that left the decision not to a man but to the gods themselves in a trial by water. The river ordeal was a supernatural form of a lie detector test, a way to prove innocence when there was no other evidence. You can imagine a scene playing out on the banks of the great Euphrates River. A man accused of a crime, adultery, sorcery, or a major theft stands before a crowd. There are no witnesses, no physical evidence, only the word of his accuser against his own. The judge, a priest, or an official declares that the gods will be the final arbiters. The accused man, his heart pounding, is told to jump into the river. The code states, if a man has put an accusation of sorcery upon a man and has not proved it against him, he upon whom the sorcery is laid shall go to the river. He shall leap into the river, and if the river seizes him, his accuser shall take his house. If the river proves that man innocent and he comes out safe, he who accused him shall be put to death. This is the ultimate high-stakes gamble. The man jumps into the fast-flowing Euphrates. If he is innocent, the river, a divine entity, will supposedly reject him, and he will be able to swim to the shore. If he is guilty, the river will accept him, and he will drown. The outcome is seen as a direct judgment from the gods. There is no appeal, no second chance. The river has spoken. It's a chilling concept, isn't it? That a person's life could depend on their ability to swim, or more accurately on the god of the river, Shamash, the very god of justice. The priests who oversaw these ordeals likely had a hand in the outcome, perhaps choosing a shallower or deeper part of the river for the accused. But to the average person, it was a moment of divine intervention, a test of purity and truth. This reliance on the supernatural for a legal outcome leads us to a point that historians still debate. Was the river ordeal a form of true justice, or a way for the ruling class to maintain control over the masses? It's easy to see how a system like this could be abused. An official who wanted to get rid of an enemy could simply accuse him of a crime and force him to take the ordeal. On the other hand, the threat of the ordeal might have been a powerful deterrent against false accusations, as we've seen with the Code's rules on slander. If you accused a man and he survived the ordeal, you were a dead man. The stakes were high for everyone involved. A fascinating and little-known detail about the ordeal is that it wasn't a punishment for a crime. It was a trial to determine innocence or guilt. The punishment came after the verdict was delivered by the river itself. If the man was innocent, the accuser was punished. If he was guilty, he was already dead. It's a brutal yet efficient system of justice. The river ordeal wasn't the only form of supernatural justice in the Code. The laws on sorcery, for instance, were also quite brutal. If a man was accused of sorcery, he would be subjected to the ordeal, and if he failed, his property would be taken by his accuser. The Code saw sorcery not just as a religious crime, but as a direct threat to the social order. It was a crime that was so serious that only the gods could deliver a verdict. This reliance on divine justice is a powerful reminder that in Hammurabi's world, the line between law and religion was almost non-existent. The king was a divine messenger, the laws were a divine gift, and the punishments were a way of maintaining divine order. The code was not just a legal document, it was a religious text, a testament to the belief that the gods were actively involved in the lives of mortals. As the day begins in earnest and the city of Babylon comes to life, you feel a renewed sense of awe for this ancient legal system. It was a system that was both a product of its time and a marvel of legal thought. It was a system that in all its brutality was designed to bring order to a world that was constantly on the brink of chaos. We've seen how the code governed everything from a farmer's crop to a doctor's hand, from a soldier's duty to a man's life. We've seen its reliance on lex talionis and its surprising moments of grace. We've even seen how it left the final verdict to the gods themselves. Now that we've explored the laws themselves, it's time to move on to their legacy. What happened to this great stele, this magnificent document of law and order? What was its impact on the future of law and justice? The story isn't over yet. The sun is shining brightly, and the last part of our journey, a reflection on the code's place in history, is about to begin. The sun is high overhead now, and the air is thick with the dust and sounds of a fully awake city. You've journeyed through the core of Hammurabi's code, from the brutal principles of lex talionis to the terrifying finality of the river ordeal. You've seen a society built on a foundation of strict rules and stark punishments. But what happened to this great document? Did it simply disappear into the sands of time, or did its influence echo far beyond the city limits of Babylon? As we move into the final chapters of our story, we'll talk about the legacy of the code and its enduring place in the history of law and justice. The great stele of Hammurabi's code, the one you've been imagining standing in the public square, did not stay in Babylon forever. It was a priceless trophy. Around 1150 BCE, a powerful Elamite king named Shutruk-Nahunte conquered Babylon and took the stele as part of his spoils of war. He had it transported to his capital city Susa in what is now modern-day Iran. For centuries, it stood there a silent testament to a long-lost empire. In 1901, a French archaeological team led by Jacques de Morgan rediscovered the stele in the ruins of Susa. It was a monumental find. The stele was in almost perfect condition, and it was one of the most complete ancient legal texts ever found. It was then transported to the Louvre Museum in Paris, where it remains to this day. It's a surreal thought, isn't it, that this ancient document of law and order written in a long-dead language is now in a modern museum viewed by millions of people every year. The rediscovery of the Code of Hammurabi had a profound effect on the field of history and legal studies. It gave scholars an unprecedented glimpse into the inner workings of an ancient society. It showed us that the Babylonians were not just conquerors and builders. They were also thinkers, administrators, and lawmakers. The code revealed a level of legal sophistication that was previously thought to be impossible for such an early civilization. It showed a society with a clear understanding of contracts of professional liability and of the concept of social classes. So, how did this ancient code influence the future of law? Its direct influence is a topic of much debate. It's unlikely that ancient Greek or Roman legal scholars ever read the Code of Hammurabi. The idea that it was a direct blueprint for later legal systems is probably a stretch. However, its indirect influence is undeniable. The code introduced the idea of a universal written law that was publicly displayed for all to see. It was a revolutionary concept. It moved law from the realm of oral tradition and the whims of a king to a formal codified system. The idea of codification mass, of putting laws down on paper, or in this case on stone, is a direct legacy of the Code of Hammurabi. This leads to a point that historians still debate: to what extent did Hammurabi's code influence the laws of the Old Testament? The similarities are striking. The Old Testament contains many laws that are similar to the Code of Hammurabi, from the famous "an eye for an eye" principle to laws about property theft and the treatment of slaves. While it's unlikely that the ancient Israelites had a copy of the code, it's very likely that they were influenced by the legal traditions of the surrounding Mesopotamian cultures. The Code of Hammurabi was the most famous and comprehensive of these traditions, and its influence would have been widespread. The similarities are too great to be a coincidence. It's a little-known detail that many legal scholars believe that the Code of Hammurabi is the ultimate source for many of the laws in the Old Testament. The code also had a lasting impact on the way we think about justice. While its punishments are undeniably brutal, it was a major step forward for the concept of justice. The code was based on the idea that the punishment should fit the crime, even if the fit was a brutal physical mirroring of the offense. It introduced the idea of legal accountability, of holding people responsible for their actions, and of a system of law that was not based on personal vengeance. Before the code, justice was often a matter of blood feuds of one family taking revenge on another. Hammurabi's code replaced that chaos with a system of public state-sanctioned justice. As the sun begins its slow descent and the shadows begin to lengthen, you realize that Hammurabi's code is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a powerful testament to the human desire for order, for justice, and for a world governed by rules. It was a brutal and unforgiving system, but in its own way, it was a step forward. It was a moment when a king decided that law should be a public, universal thing, a thing that everyone in his kingdom, from the highest noble to the lowest slave, would be subject to. It was a monumental achievement, and its legacy a legacy of codified law, and a sense of legal accountability still echoes in our world today. The sun is beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city of Babylon. The air is cooling, and the distant sounds of the day are fading. You've journeyed through the laws, explored the society, and traced the legacy of Hammurabi's code. But as we reach the end of our story, it's time to take a moment and reflect on the deeper meaning of justice in a world so different from our own. What can this brutal, ancient legal text tell us about ourselves and about the very nature of law? As you stand in the fading light, you can't help but think about the sheer brutality of the punishments. It's a world where a broken bone is met with a broken bone, and a failed surgery is met with a severed hand. There is no concept of a second chance of rehabilitation or of forgiveness. The code is a system of brutal accountability, a system that says, you did this and this is what will happen to you. It's a shocking contrast to our modern legal systems, which, while not perfect, are at least based on the ideal of rehabilitation and the concept of innocent until proven guilty. But here's a thought: in a world without police forces, without forensic science, and without prisons, as we know them, were these brutal punishments the only way to maintain order? If a punishment wasn't immediate, public, and terrifying, would anyone have paid attention? The punishments in Hammurabi's code were designed to be a deterrent, a public spectacle that would make anyone think twice before committing a crime. A man being drowned in the river or having his hands cut off was a powerful message to everyone in the city. The law is serious and it will be enforced. It's a little-known detail that many ancient legal systems relied on public, brutal punishments for this very reason. It was a way of enforcing the law without a standing army of police officers. This brings us to a point that historians still debate: to what extent did Hammurabi's code actually reflect the daily realities of Babylonian life? Was it a legal text to be applied literally in every case, or was it more of a moral and ethical guide for judges? It's a tricky question. There are very few surviving court cases from ancient Babylon that show the code being applied literally. This has led some scholars to believe that the code was more of a legal textbook, a guide for what a just punishment should look like rather than a rigid set of rules. The code was a vision of what a perfect, orderly society should be. It was a statement from the king to his people: this is what I consider to be just and right. The code also tells us a lot about the values of ancient Babylonian society. It tells us that they valued social order above all else. The code's ultimate goal was to maintain a stable, predictable society, even if it meant sacrificing individual rights for the good of the whole. It tells us that they valued property and commerce, as evidenced by the extensive laws on contracts, loans, and business partnerships. And it tells us that they had a deep-seated belief in a social hierarchy with different rules and different punishments for different people. The code was not an equal opportunity document. It was a reflection of a society that believed that a person's worth was determined by their social class. As the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky and the first stars begin to appear, you feel a sense of profound awe for this ancient legal text. It was a document born out of a desire for order in a world of chaos. It was a document that, in all its brutality, was a major step forward for the concept of law. It introduced the idea of a public, universal legal system of legal accountability and of a world where justice was not just a matter of a king's whim, but a matter of a written, codified law. It was a brutal and unforgiving system, but it was a system. And for a world that was just beginning to find its footing, that was a monumental achievement. The story of the Code of Hammurabi is not just a story about laws and punishments. It is a story about the long and winding road of human civilization. A story about the very first steps we took toward creating a world that was governed not by chaos, but by a set of rules. The night is quiet now and the stars are shining brightly. The moon hangs high and bright in the sky, a silent witness to the city of Babylon, which is now fully asleep. The air is cool and still. You've come to the end of your journey, a journey through a world of brutal laws and ancient justice. You've seen how Hammurabi's code governed every aspect of life, from the grand affairs of state to the smallest, most intimate details of the family. You've felt the weight of its brutal logic and the terror of its swift punishments. It's time now to quietly say goodbye to this ancient world. As you look at the sleeping city, you can almost feel the ghosts of the people who lived under these laws. The farmer who worried about his irrigation ditch, the merchant who prayed for a safe journey, the doctor who gambled his hands with every cut of his scalpel. Their lives were not easy, and they lived in a world that was both magnificent and terrifying. But their lives were also governed by a sense of order, by a set of rules that, for all their brutality, provided a sense of predictability and justice. The Code of Hammurabi was not a perfect document, but it was a revolutionary one. It was a giant leap forward from a world of chaos and vengeance. The ziggurats, the towering temples of the gods, stand like silent mountains against the night sky. They are a reminder that in this world, the line between the sacred and the secular was blurred. The law was not just a king's command, it was a divine gift. The punishments were not just a human decision, they were a way of maintaining a divine order. This reliance on the gods for justice is one of the most fascinating aspects of the code. It's a reminder that our modern secular legal systems are a relatively recent invention. For most of human history, law and religion were inextricably linked. So what have we learned from this journey? We've learned that justice is not a universal concept. It is a product of its time, a reflection of the values and beliefs of a particular society. For the Babylonians, justice was about maintaining order, about holding people accountable for their actions, and about ensuring that every person, no matter their social class, had a clear set of rules to live by. The punishments were a means to an end, a tool for creating a stable, predictable society. And in a world that was constantly on the brink of war and famine, that was a precious and necessary thing. We've also learned that the past is not a foreign country. It is a part of us. The ideas in Hammurabi's code, the ideas of contracts, of professional liability, of legal accountability, still echo in our world today. The famous phrase, "an eye for an eye," is still a part of our cultural vocabulary, even if its brutal, literal application has long since faded from our laws. The Code of Hammurabi is not just a historical curiosity, it is a part of our legal heritage. It is a powerful reminder that our modern legal systems, for all their complexity and nuance, are built on a foundation that was laid thousands of years ago in the dusty streets of ancient Babylon. The night is quiet now. The moon is shining brightly and a gentle, cool breeze is blowing through the streets. The story of Hammurabi's code has been told, and the ghosts of the past are now at rest. You can close your eyes and let the sounds of this ancient city, the distant murmur of the river, the soft rustle of the wind, and the silent presence of the laws carved in stone, lull you into a deep and peaceful sleep. You've walked the streets of Babylon, you've seen the face of its justice, and you can now leave it all behind.